Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of organic growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. My guest this week is a timely one. Michael Bowman is founding chair of the National Hemp Association. He is also the author of Section 7606 of the 2014 Farm Bill, a provision that grants U.S. farmers the right to cultivate hemp in states where hemp production is now legal for the first time since Congress passed the 1933 Farm Bill. He's known in some circles as Mr. Hemp for his activism, and he has been instrumental in shaping the state of Colorado's hemp policy as chair of Colorado's New Energy Future and served as co-chair of Governor-elect Bill Ritter's Energy Transition Team. A graduate of the Colorado Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, Michael spent his entire adult life in rural advocacy. He has served as founding board member of numerous environmental and hemp advocacy organizations, including the Rocky Mountain Hemp Association, Colorado Industrial Hemp Commission, the American Renewable Energy Institute, and the Sustainable Biodiesel Alliance, to name a few. He is also a co-founder of the Colorado Farm to Cafeteria Work Group, advisor to the Savory Institute, and a board member of the National American Industrial Hemp Association. Michael is a next-generation fellow in Columbia University's American Assembly and a 2008 recipient of Gamma Sigma Delta's Significant Achievement in Agriculture by Colorado State University. With everything going on right now around hemp, I thought it was the perfect time to get him on the show to answer some questions about what to expect in 2019. I brought on Nelson Lindsley from Poetry of Plants to assist me in the interview. Some of the audio quality of this taping wasn't as good as I would have liked, so apologies in advance for some of the background noise. Anyway, on to the show. Hey, Michael, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
It's great to be here.
And thank you as well to Nelson Lindsley of Poetry of Plants for coming on as well to help with the interview.
Thanks, Tad.
Yeah, so Michael, I really wanted to start out just talking a little bit about your personal background and how you got into everything that you're doing now.
Well, thanks, Tad. I am a fifth-generation Coloradan. I grew up on our family's farming and ranching operation on the Eastern Plains, and after college, spent a couple of decades full-time with the family farm. We had a rather large operation, but I was always interested in sustainability and the environment and rural development and technology and all that nexus of things that kind of keep us on the cutting edge of what's next in agriculture. And then we were plagued by the fact that our operation was over the Ogallala Aquifer, where we grew and grow a lot of corn. And the entire aquifer, as you might know, is one of the largest underground aquifers in the world. And we are unsustainably depleting it to grow corn predominantly in a way that, and under a kind of an economic model where it may be one of the worst economic models ever devised. We're pulling fossil water from the ground with coal-fired power from Wyoming to produce a crop that needs to be subsidized by the federal government. It is absolutely a house of cards that we've set up. And so I was always interested in, what's next? How do we transition from corn to something else? How do we keep our rural communities viable? What's that next? What's the next magic trick to help us get better at what we do? And at that time, and this was in the late '90s and early 2000s, I was spending a lot of time in Zimbabwe with Alan Savory on soils management. Soil carbon it interested me a lot in its play and absorbing atmospheric carbon with good organic content and such. And in those days, you could talk about carbon sink or carbon absorption and mostly get blank stares from everybody. But I happened to be in Zimbabwe one trip, and we were sitting around a campfire one night, and an Australian couple came through, and they had just been in India, where they were talking about this transition from a hemp economy, basically hemp-based economy, to GMO cotton, and all the struggles that the farmers were going through and the trouble they were having taking this centuries-old practice and what they were doing with industrial hemp and moving into this chemically based world. And at that time, there were, and still are, there was a lot of suicides happening in the farm country because what was happening in that society. When you can't take care of your family financially, there's an honor kill, there's an honor suicide, and there's something over 200,000 farmers today that have committed suicide that are generally related to this transition, and they were doing it, and many of them were doing it by drinking the very chemicals they were being forced to put on their land for the first time ever. And so I came at this initially from a kind of a social justice warrior perspective. It's like, this is just wrong. We need to figure out what's happening here. And then as I wandered through that history and the story and the industrial hemp plant, I became obsessed with the plant. Now, keep in mind, our farm was in the Central Great Plains. We were far enough west that they were just breaking out prairie and starting to farm about the time Prohibition was in place. So put in place in 1937. So industrial hemp farming never made it as far west, and so I was never introduced to the plant. And then as I learned about the plant and its need, basically it's something that's environmentally benign and something that had thousands of products that could be made from the plant and could be drought tolerant. It was just checking every box for me. It's like, okay, now why aren't we in the United States doing that? Went back and studied the history of the Prohibition and what happened in 1937, then through 1970 with Nixon and the Controlled Substances Act, and then got really fired up about the policy side of it. I'd done a lot of work in DC and continue to do so around environment and sustainability over the last couple of decades. So I was no stranger to Washington and no stranger to state politics as well. And so started my journey in Colorado of educating people about hemp from 2006 to 2010. I and another woman, Linda Parker, in Denver, did quarterly meetings and reached out to farmers and the Bar Association and legislators and regulators to talk about this plant and why is it illegal, and could Colorado step up and be the tip of the spear on ending this national prohibition. And so in 2011, we got our legislature to pass a resolution unanimously supporting the reintroduction of the plant. And early 2012, then we got our legislature to pass a phyto remediation bill, a small one that Colorado State University could play in after the forest fires, kind of reclaiming some soil from the vast fires we'd had the summer before. And then, of course, in 2012, the fall of 2012, we passed our historic Amendment 64, which ended prohibition of the plant in its entirety, from recreational adult use to industrial hemp farming. So we took we scored that as our win. Washington State legalized that same night. We're a time zone ahead, so we like to say we did it first, but we did it. We did it the same night, and off we went and formed a national organization, the National Hemp Association, of which I was the founding board chair, and worked at both the federal level and state levels then on getting states to legalize. So today, from that night in November of 12, when Colorado and Washington legalized, we've gone from 2 that evening to 41 today. In the late May, early June of 2013, I wrote some language and took it to then Congressman Polis, who is now the governor of Colorado, and asked if he would consider including this in the amendment process for the then House language for the 2013, which became the 2014 Farm Bill, that became Section 7606, which was the amendment that really opened the door for this industry to start doing what it does best, innovating and growing and creating opportunities. And so, as you see now, over the last 5 years, 7606, by opening that door, is we've created the beginnings, I think, of a substantial and lasting industry in the country. I think last year we had about 75,000 acres U.S. wide in the space, and then of course the recent Farm Bill that was signed about a little over a month ago deschedules the plant and does a number of other things along with that language. So I think we're well out of the barn now, and looking forward to creating these opportunities and letting America get into a place again where we can lead in production and development of products and job creation and all the things we can do well when we have good policy in place.
So what can we expect for this year with the addition of the 2018 Farm Bill? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I think there's some irrational exuberance about where we are, not about the plant's potential or where we're going to go, but really where we are as an industry. Per the Farm Bill, we still have a process that has to be put in place by the feds, federal standards, state plans being approved, and such. And keep in mind, the government went into shutdown the day after the Farm Bill was signed, so nothing has been done per the prescriptive remedies in the Farm Bill. So we still have to get those done. The states that are legal will be in the process of submitting plans to the USDA. Those that aren't legal are going to have to step up, this session, and they don't have to do anything, but their opportunity to step up, legalize, and let their farmers be in the game. I'm in Iowa today. And tomorrow, and Iowa is one of the 9 that has not legalized, much to the chagrin of many of the producers here in the state. So we're going to be, trying to, tease out those legislators who have been somewhat reluctant to step into this space and get them in a position of support. And I'm going to be talking to a conference of over 900 land managers in the U.S. Tomorrow who control a lot of land in the United States that are interested in this as a viable third crop, a new rotation, and frankly, if we're gonna take this industry to the the fiber and bioplastics and composites world and hempcrete and the things that we know that's very good at, we're going to have to get to a scale and acreage that's far beyond where we are today. So I think 2019 is still going to be. I still see this as a transition year. We'll likely see again a bump in acreage, but I don't think we're going to see the large increases until after this year because of some of the constraints that are still practically in place.
Michael, what's the biggest pushback you're hearing from the legislation and the politicians on the government scale side of things to keep this from being legal in all 50 states? I mean, that's a curious thing for me. Is it directly related to cannabis, or is it just another?
Yeah, it's still I think a lingering the reefer madness here. A lot of it is generational. If you have a regulator or a legislator who's maybe in their 70s or early 80s, they really do believe that this is the devil's lettuce. No matter what you say, and it doesn't matter what it is. To them, there is no distinction. And in fact, interestingly enough, in Hawaii. Yesterday, Representative Cynthia Thielen, who's been a bulwark on this, she's just been an incredible supporter of this industry over her years in the Hawaii State Legislature, had to put out a very terse press release to the Hawaii Department of Agriculture's bill that they had submitted to their just convened legislature, where they still refer to it as a scheduled substance, And in their case, there's a very active DEA concern over there that has never liked the idea of legalizing hemp, and that's one case. And the other cases, I'd say in Iowa, I think it's been Senator Grassley has been very slow to warm up to this idea, and again, I think that's for him that's generational. They just believe this is a slippery slope to heroin for babies, and the question, where do we stop? Well, maybe you stop somewhere between heroin for babies. The jokes kind of write themselves, and then I don't mean that it's not funny because this is a serious issue when we're debating science, but it is amusing that in 2019 we're still having science-based arguments on this plant.
Sure. One of the things you mentioned was just sort of maybe to mute the exuberance a little bit for 2019. That was something I heard a lot of from other policy experts around hemp. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're thinking that 2019 is still going to be the year of getting policy and regulation in place, and it probably won't be till 2020 or maybe even later when it's really going to hit, and we're going to have this boom with industrial hemp.
Agreed. I think we really are. I think we'll still see some growth in the industry this year. I think we've seen sometimes 2 to 3x growth year to year since 2014. So we will have some growth, but frankly, we don't have the infrastructure in place to handle a large crop. And what we don't want to do is make the same mistake Canada did in 1998-99, where they opened the door, let the farmers grew a lot of acreage early on, with really no market developed, no infrastructure to take that seed into a hemp heart, or the stock into a fiber or herd, and so we've got to have it. This is an all hands on deck opportunity / challenge here, to bring private interests and money and government and policy and farmers together to build this out. I think we can do it quickly with the right partners, but again, we have a lot of, probably the largest void in all of this is the lack of infrastructure.
So one other question I had is I've heard a lot of issues around cross-pollination with type 1 plants, a lot of concern from cannabis growers that are growing high THC plants with this idea of industrial hemp taking off, and poor regulation on the part of farmers will cause them to ruin a lot of sinsemilla crops.
Well, that is a valid concern. We had to deal with that in Colorado early on, in southern Colorado near Pueblo, where there was a lot of both outdoor marijuana grows and hemp. And in that case, I think under the threat of the county and state, instituting regulations, they've self-regulated. I know in Oregon, I think if I remember right, the first year they canceled the industrial hemp program the first year because of some of those concerns of the established type 1 growers. So I think that those are valid concerns. Those are concerns in Hawaii. They're frankly going to be concerns in a lot of places, if not everywhere. And so that's one of that is one of the issues we're really going to have to look at carefully, and keep everybody informed on that, because the last thing we want is the possibility of a train wreck where we have people permitted to do type 1 and type 2 fence row to fence row here. So we've got to incorporate that concern. It's real.
So is the solution right now regulation around locations, so that making sure, say, for example, that any industrial hemp is going to be at least 5 miles or whatever distance is deemed appropriate from, say, pre-existing type 1 cultivation locations?
I think at the very least it's going to take some, the state regulators to be able to map this and be able to, when an application is received, to either respond or because I think it's going to be a little messy in the beginning, because there's going to be a rush of permits for this, and the lack of a state or county regulatory framework is going we're going to I think we can almost be assured we're going to have a couple train wrecks this year. And I don't mean large ones, but we're going to have this collision somewhere, somehow, some way, because there just isn't enough oversight in place to at least even just alert the folks what's happening in their backyard.
Oh, so you think that some legal growers in states are going to get hit with pollen just out of the blue at some point, unaware that there was even hemp going on in their area? Is that the concern that you're raising? I do think that's exactly the case, Tad, that there will be some unintended. These aren't going to be purposeful plants, and nobody's doing that to purposely harm another. But I can imagine that we will have that scenario in more than one place in 19. Changing direction on the genetics side, where are you finding most people are sourcing seed, and are you seeing any particular cultivars being more highly sourced or cultivated than others at this point in time?
Well, most of the seed for the traditional grows, I would say, just from my experience, it's coming out of Canada. The X59 seems to be very popular. I know there's a company bringing in seed now from Eastern and Western Europe. that they believe won't get hot. So, and that we're going to see a lot of that until we get more certified seed in place, more of our own genetics in place. Of course, Colorado's kind of a hotbed right now for genetic work, seed genetics, but everything that's coming out of there, small quantities, still test plots. So I think the bulk of this is still going to be from the traditional side again, imports.
Okay, and when you see, I haven't seen an industrial hemp field in person yet, but what I'm picturing is something with a lot of genetic diversity and variety where you're going to have plants of all heights and sizes. We haven't gotten breeding, as I understand it, to the point where, like another agricultural crop, where you'll see consistency across the field. Are we headed that direction, or are you already seeing some of that in the field?
Well, keep in mind, the vast majority of acres in the U.S. have been non-traditional, but I've seen some fields of the Canadian seed brought in that was very uniform. I have witnessed a field in Colorado and one in Kentucky that was very erratic in its heights. So, I don't know what seed stock the erratic heights were. But from what I saw on the imports from the Canadian side, they seem to be pretty uniform.
So I've got a two-parter, Michael. Is there any way you could explain why the wording regarding the FDA and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act Authority was included in the bill?
Well, keep in mind that this bill was predominantly written in Senator McConnell's office, although it's been the bulk of that language has been a kind of a succession of language from the Industrial Hemp Farming Act that started in 2013. I can say that I think that as we're ending an 8-decade-old oversight of the federal government by this, and the concerns that have had their fingers on this pie, so that whether that be FDA or DEA, these old regulators die hard, and I think that I'm somewhat speculating, but the FDA has always had authority over labeling and claims, and I think they will continue to do that to the extent that we're going to be in the supplement or food additive space. Even though that we are going to be descheduled in an agricultural crop, I think this is just a matter of a time frame of how we kind of we lessen that oversight and get to a a less relaxed atmosphere. And I don't mean relaxed in the sense that we want to put anything out bad. I just mean I think we need to look at the nuance and the rhetoric that comes from their statements. Their statement which came out the day after, I think was when I look at it, I think they had to do what they had to do. They still have their framework and what they think they need to do, and again, this policy journey isn't done. We're going to have we'll have some cleanup language. I think we may, over time see things like increases in the THC. We know that a year ago, Congressman Bob Goodlatte, who was the chair of the House Judiciary, was open to moving that up to a 0.6. So I think I don't get too tangled up in some of this. I watch a lot of social media feeds, and I generally don't engage because I think there is a lot of hysteria. There's a lot of it goes from hysteria to concern to, well, this is from my world, which has generally been policy. I think these things are it's just not one giant step and you fix everything. We'll continue to tweak and make it better for the industry. And I'm not really a conspiracy theory guy on what's going on here, but maybe they exist. I don't know. I don't. That's not my world, and I don't really kind of fall into that camp. I think that we're demonstrating that this is going to be a serious, robust industry with a lot of opportunity, and if there's anything politicians understand is the job creation and the things that all the things that are good about this industry. And so it's our job as advocates to continue to push for, better and better language and environments. And it's the regulator's job to generally take as conservative approach as they can with the regulations they've been handed. So somewhere in the middle of all that, we find a way to all coexist. And I think that's my opinion, and not shared by everyone, but it's mine.
So you're in Iowa, like you said, which is a state that is not legalized yet. What are you seeing from farmers there, like crop farmers that have been growing other vegetables and other crops? Is there becoming sort of this acceptance of hemp as a possibility? Are people getting excited about it? Is there still a lot of negativity and things like that around the crop? What are you seeing?
Well, I see and hear a lot of enthusiasm for it, and I think again, just this general disconnect between policymakers and farmers and rural advocates and those on the ground, mostly rooted in again decades old myths and lies and constructs that made no sense at all. So I think it's general enthusiasm, and but in Iowa's case, they're very corn centric. There's a lot of genetics companies and chemical companies here. Most of this is all built upon that house of cards, which we call the Farm Bill, and everything that props that system up. So there's infrastructure and history here and a legacy to what many Iowans think they are. And then you have a strong and growing group out there that know that we need a third way. We need a legitimate third crop to do a lot of things, whether it's cleaning up soil, cleaning up the environment, and creating new jobs for rural Iowa and rural America.
Okay, that brought up an interesting question because you mentioned remediation. When we're talking about hemp right now, how are you defining that versus, say, a lot of what people are talking about around CBDs? So I realize that it seems that a lot of the cultivation that people are most excited about right now is not from like a textile or more traditional industrial hemp perspective, but really for the CBD possibilities. How are you defining these terms, and how do you think they're relevant in terms of how people are looking to grow the plant?
Well, I'd say in the regenerative space, that is most definitely going to be in the traditional grows, not the CBD space. So I think we have, on one side we have on the CBD side, health and wellness and grown naturally and job creation and doing what we're doing. Then over on the other side of the ledger, with more traditional grows is where we're going to see the I think the practice of regenerative soil and soil remediation and the things that plant does best when it's planted in the more traditional terms.
So are you seeing as maybe becoming part of a more conventional crop cycle for Iowans as a way of remediating the soil then? Is that what you're getting at?
I think it'll be both, because I think that the magic of this plant is that it provides a space for everyone, whether you're a small Iowa farmer who wouldn't be surrounded by traditional crops and wanted to incorporate a CBD grow for a young one of your children that wanted to return, or you're a young person coming back wanting to come back to the rural landscape. You're going to have, I think, and you're willing to put in that work and that time. The CBD space, allows that opportunity to come to fruition. If you're a more traditional Iowan, if you're a corn and soybean farmer, you're looking for a rotation. Maybe your buffer areas would be better suited to a hemp crop from a water quality and soil quality perspective. You'll do that. Now, again, we're going to get back into these spacing issues and the pollination challenges with that. But we're going to have both.
So if you could wave a magic wand and create whatever policy you wanted around hemp and cannabis, how would you set up a state like Iowa?
Well, I think that we may see, and it may be useful if we get it down to a more local level or from a county perspective. Now that we've we've ended the prohibition at the federal level. We have statewide regulations, but I think ultimately this is going to have to come down to some county involvement where we map, or there's going to have to be. I think there's going to have to be a lot of work done at that county level on how these worlds are going to live together. I don't see any way of getting around that, because in my earlier description of small farmers coming back, there's a lot of small farms here in Iowa who are trying to hang on. Ditto for Minnesota and Wisconsin. Where I've spent a lot of time with the last couple of weeks, there's small farmers wanting to get into this space, and maybe we're going to have regions where the counties will permit one but not the other, or they give priority to one or the other, so the permitting process has a priority chain. So but I just don't know how we're going to get around not doing that, frankly.
So you think this crop could be a savior for a lot of struggling farmers on the agricultural side, or at least it might have that potential?
Oh, I absolutely do. I mean, I've seen it in Colorado. This is attracting young people back to these small farms and towns that I frankly, these young people and are very excited, and they're excited about this crop. Now, they're not going to come back to these small towns to grow corn or soybeans or those kind of things, but this plant just opens up a whole new range of opportunities for that to happen. And I can tell you, I've spent a lot of, again, going back to Minnesota and Wisconsin the last couple of weeks, these small dairy farms that are just dying on the vine. And if they're not dead already as a dairy farm, they have land, they have barns, they have ways to, get back in the game and stay on the farm. And that's really exciting to me. My maternal grandfather was a small dairy farmer in Minnesota. He lived in a county that was one of the largest milk producing counties in Minnesota, 40 years ago. There's almost no dairies left today, but the whole, the rich land, the barns, these kids and descendants who want to come back, that's a real thing. So I'm really excited about that, that kind of opportunity. I'm also excited about the regenerative nature and getting a legitimate third crop in a rotation for the corn and soybean farmers. But for me, what hits home the closest is this opportunity for the smaller farms to have something that's going to let them be viable.
Well, this could be a big economic boon for the state as well, I feel like, especially those states that are more agrarian and have struggled, it seems like, the center of the United States there. Do you see hemp as maybe being that possible crop, especially if we eventually move to some interstate, commerce on this?
I do. I'm more convinced than ever now this is the real deal for those communities.
Michael, when we're looking at the regulations around the THC percentage, do you think that we'll get to a point where there'll be some rounding on the THC percentage, or is 0.31 going to be counted the same as 10? Or,
right.
There's the cultivars for CBD hemp, and I did 7 acres this last season, but they're not super stable. You can have a lot of them have been back crossed into cannabis strains to get certain terp profiles or structure. And my question is, how are we going to be looking at this in the future? Because then once you extract the CBD, you're going to be left with a concentration that's above that limit of THC that's to be destroyed. So how are they looking at this, and where do you think the future of how they're going to treat the THC percentage in the plant?
Well, we are going to have this conversation both at the federal level, and as we see how the feds put their standards in place, maybe we'll get a little flavor of where USDA is going to come from. I think at the state level, for instance, in Colorado, I do think we're going to have to, and I think we have the political will to set some kind of research category in place. It goes from, let's say, 0.3 to 1. I'm just throwing out something, maybe 0.8, or maybe something other than that. But I think in our case, I'm going to use Colorado's case. We have a legislature and a governor and a university system who wants our farmers to flourish and understand that we're early on in this game. Not everything's stable, and there's no reason with the technology and the science we have access to that something that's 0.31 should be destroyed and considered marijuana. That's just ludicrous. So I think I'm going to guess that in this next year, I think Colorado's going to be one of them. There may be others that they're going to kind of step out and say, okay, we're going to put a buffer here and demonstrate it. And again, then probably have to go back from a policy perspective back to the federal level and do some tweaking. Again, that's what I kind of referred to earlier. These policy changes are, they're just not a one and done. This is going to be a constant modification, or at least it's going to be a modification for a period of time as this industry grows. Because as we know, we want to get back to science-based arguments. I have been in private meetings with DEA concerns who would say privately that they think that the standard ought to be 1%. Now they're not going to say that publicly. That's against that's in the face of the scheduling parameters and what they're forced to regulate. But they would tell you that that they think this, and we know that there's no science behind the 0.3, right? So I think our next battle is going to be proving that out and putting something in place that can be from a scientific perspective be put in place.
And would that also relate to other cannabinoids that are in the plants that are not considered Schedule 1, but may have a medical value? Because there's a lot in the hemp and cannabis chemovars that have more value that we haven't even discovered yet. And has there even been a conversation on that, or has it just been a conversation around THC and CBD, which in my opinion is kind of limited?
Right. Well, keep in mind, the language does say, all extracts, from that plant. So, and to more to your point, to your question, Tad, was no, the only conversations are really around, THC and just the general CBD discussion, but nothing. We have not drilled down beyond that, in Washington.
Well, the other thing I got to hear Ronald Turco from Purdue speak, and I'm hoping to get him on the show too. One of the things he mentioned is a lot of it was around timing of harvest. When you harvest, the plant really determines that THC content, and plants that may fail or may not fail was really related just to timing.
Agreed. Again, another one of those, that you kind of that going back to, making those, those science-based arguments like he made, to regulators, and again, I think we're so early in this game. I mean, if you really think back, we took on, 8 decades of lies and myths and turned it on its head. Now, how often do we see that happen? In our federal government, from policy. So, again, going back to that exuberance or irrational exuberance, I think where we've gotten to is monumental. I think we still have a lot of work to go, a long way to go yet, and getting this right and good. So we can't rest on our laurels. We've got to, tease these things out, test some of the state levels so we have an argument in Congress for making tweaks and changes, and we certainly have the activists in this community are passionate, and I think if we can not mire ourselves in infighting and focus on kind of what's next, we'll be a lot better off for it, and then there will be a lot of what's next because we've got a lot of those we're going to have to deal with.
So, Michael, when I talk to other individuals that are getting into the space or investors, a lot of what I hear is that they're looking at international supply of hemp biomass and derivatives of hemp, and that's going to be where the market isn't going to really land in America. And I don't really believe that personally. I think that there's unique environments here that are going to be specialized. But I'm hearing that, there's it seems like the international hemp market has a good head start on American progress. And the question would be, how do we balance those imports with our own growth, and how do we help educate people on the value and the timeline, essentially, of what there appears to be a timeline on the market in a sense as a commodity.
Through my glasses and my view, we are going to have some imports. We see a lot of that happening, and whether it's imports of biomass, whether it's imports of Canadian money coming into the country to build this industry. What Americans are really good at is when you put a good policy in place and turn them loose, and the world knows this. We innovate quickly. We do good big things fast. And so, I think we'll have two phases here. We're going to see some of this international. We're going to see the importing. We're going to see a lot of positioning by folks who want to, claim that X is going to happen. I don't believe that. I believe in kind of an American, ingenuity and what we're going to do, what we can do here. And I think we are going to quickly catch up with the world and then be a leader beyond that point in time.
Part of what I think is going to help us become that is on the genetic development and innovation around the cannabis genome and the research that a lot of cannabis companies are beginning to do, and how that will carry into hemp. So with all that in mind, is there a clear path for hemp seed USDA certification at the moment, or is that still ambiguous?
It's still ambiguous. Yeah, it's ambiguous.
Okay. So when I look at some of the regulations in California, because California has not issued farm IDs yet, but they're allowing it. So it's this weird kind of Wild West cowboy gray area. Yeah. But what they require is a type of seed certification, and they call it like foundational, generational, and then there's another term that's escaping me right now. So if you're a hemp farmer in California and you're required to start with some kind of level of certified hemp seed, would that mean that you would have to purchase the seed out of the country, like with some other international certified seed stock? Or is that something that we can create under a research program with the right research institution?
Well, I think that they're going to have to get the OSCA, sort of the international certification is probably going to have to come up. Like California is just, when I talk to folks, when you look at the mess in California and the Keystone Cops in Hawaii on this thing, you just think, really, we are in 2019, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, some of us aren't yet, but so I think that's, I think California's, well, I'm going to welcome California to the family when they get their act together.
Got it.
To your point, I think they're going to have to have some kind of international certification. Of course, I believe I haven't stayed like really close to the rollout of the down in the weeds, but I do believe that there's a pretty significant influence from the Canadian seed market in that California framework. So I guess we'll see how that plays.
So with that in mind, what I've seen, so the hemp cultivars that I was able to purchase, I really look at as a low THC cannabis cultivar. Those were created under a research program and certified under the purchase of another industrial hemp seed. And it's just been a little unclear on how there's a highway or a path for these new cultivars to emerge where they can be considered hemp. Or is it just being measured on THC? Or is there going to be is this just still muddy and I'm asking questions that can't be answered?
Yeah, I think for me that you're probably asking a question that I can't answer. I think that is yet to be seen, and yet to be seen how that plays out. So I wish I wish I had a good answer for that, Ted, but I don't.
Okay. So and then the final thing I just wanted to say is I wanted to thank you personally for being a part of this movement and doing the work that you've done. It's opened up a considerable amount of doors for a lot of people you probably don't know and a lot of people you do know. And I see that this opportunity is saving a lot of struggling cannabis farmers as well. And I'm seeing a lot of pivots from cannabis into hemp because some of the understanding and experience will apply, especially when cultivating the higher CBD. And I just wanted to thank you for all that work.
Well, I thank you, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I've had the blessing of knowing the Willie Nelson family for a little over 15 years, and one of my first conversations with Willie back in the day, when early on in this, and he said that we will start saving the small American farmer the day that they can start growing cannabis on their farms. And
I agree.
He was right. It just took us a long time to get here, but at least we're here. We got a place to start from now.
I did have one last question for you, Michael. I was wondering if I'm a person, a grower or a farmer that wants to get into hemp, do you have a sort of a pathway or any recommendations for someone who wants to start exploring that as a potential field?
Well, the best place to start, is at least I know in Colorado and many other states are putting together some really good information on their State Department of Agriculture websites. So, that's always I'd say that's always a good place to start. They're your regulators. You're going to have to, go through them. All roads go through them. And so I know Minnesota's, putting together has a nice place. Colorado does as well. Some of the other national organizations are great resources. Vote Hemp and the HIA have got some great resources on their web pages as well. So I think kind of focus on both and get to know your regulator and then move into some of those organizations and join the organization and help support the cause because they're the front line of policy.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time today. That was very helpful for me in learning more about what's going on in the hemp industry. And good luck with all the talks and speaking engagements that you have around hemp and everything you're doing. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. As a side, it'll be fun tonight. This conference is keynoted by Martha Stewart, so I'll have a chance to bend Martha's ear this evening over dinner about hemp. We'll get her in our space.
That was Michael Bowman, and you are listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. I'd like to thank Nelson Lindsley for coming on the show to assist with the interview. I'd also like to thank everyone who has donated to the Patreon account. I really appreciate the support of the podcast. You can check that out at www.patreon.com/KISorganics. And don't forget to check out my website, where I put up a ton of information and also offer a wide variety of organic amendments, soils, and other gardening products at www.kisorganics.com. Thanks for listening.